We are live.
And welcome into Gator Bytes on the 1010XL.com podcast network, also being simulcast on the Florida Gator 1010XL Facebook page. Today's Gator podcast is brought to you by Southeast Orthopedic Specialist. They're Northeast Florida's leading orthopedic center, providing an unparalleled level of care across numerous locations in both Jacksonville and St. Augustine. That includes Riverside, Northside, the South Side, the beaches, Fleming Island, and St. John's. He is Graham Marsh. I'm the hacker Ryan Green, and you, presumably, are Florida Gator fans as the season gets underway tomorrow. Florida and Miami. We've been talking about this game for weeks and months on end, and now here we are, just over 24 hours away from kickoff. Graham Marsh, happy college football season to you, my man.
Happy college football season. It feels like Christmas morning, or today feels like Christmas Eve if you're a football fan.
It does. It does now. Will the Gators get a lump of coal in their stocking tomorrow, beginning at 3:30? That's yet to be seen. But we've already seen some surprises already. I mean, you think you know so much about college football coming into the year, and then Dublin, Ireland happens with Georgia Tech beating Florida State. So who really knows what to expect tomorrow from a lot of these games?
Chaos.
Yeah.
I know to expect that. North Dakota State giving Colorado a run for their money last night. I think we all kind of knew that would be a good game. The North Dakota State's that's not a program to be pushed around.
Minnesota, North Carolina was a lot of fun.
What a game, man. Coming down to that last missed field goal. I thought Minnesota had it. I thought they were going to make that.
I hated seeing the injury to Max Johnson, though.
Yeah, it sucked.
The North Carolina quarterback. So that was an unfortunate way to start the year.
And they were showing his dad, former Jaguar.
Yeah, former Florida State Seminole, Brad Johnson. Yeah, so it was tough. All right, so let's dive in. We'll talk about some other SEC games at the end of the podcast, but obviously it's all Florida, it's all Miami, it's all the time today. I'll go ahead and let the cat out of the bag. I think Florida's going to go 7-5 this year. I've said that the entire year. I would take 7-5 and head for the hills. I almost think one of their 7's going to be tomorrow. I've kind of had a change of heart as we're getting closer to the game. This has Utah vibes of 2 years ago to me. The game being in Gainesville, Cam Ward's first game as a Hurricane, on the road in front of 93,000. I don't think he had a lot of that in Pullman, Washington last year. That environment, I think Florida is going to win the game tomorrow. I really do.
I do too. I also think this season kind of has 2022 vibes in general. Something that worries me, and you've brought this up a lot, so I know you're going to agree with me here. What I'm predicting right now is I think Florida beats Miami, and then they beat Samford next week, and they're going to think that they're all high and mighty because they're 2-0, and everybody thought they'd be terrible, and they're going to be feeling themselves a little bit, and then Texas A&M rolls to town week 3.
Yeah,
that's getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. I know we're previewing the Miami game, but that worries me a bit. If Florida has this huge, big emotional win over Miami and then gets to 2-0, what is that going to mean for the gauntlet ahead? Are they going to be properly motivated and prepared for that? Concerns me a little bit.
Well, let's not mistake this. I'm picking Florida literally because the game is in Gainesville. If the game was in Coral Gables, I'm picking Miami. If the game was at a neutral site, say Tampa or Orlando, I'm probably picking Miami. My pick, about 90% of my reasoning, is because it's in the swamp. So I'm not doing, an X's and O's, Florida's better on both sides of the ball, because I don't believe they are. I think just like 2 years ago against Utah, a game in which Florida really had no business winning, I think the home field advantage, and maybe the home field advantage alone, is going to put Florida over the top.
Yeah, I think the main factor within that is Cam Ward playing his first game with brand new team, and Damian Martinez playing his first game with brand new. Running back's not the same as quarterback, but Cam Rising had some issue. I mean, they went down and scored a couple times now, a bunch of times with Utah. To be fair, it's not like their offense couldn't do anything, but they did have some miscues throughout the game. Not a bunch, but a few. I remember Bryce Young in 2021 had a whole bunch of miscues with his offense. Remember that game?
Yeah.
They had trouble getting the ball snapped, a bunch of false starts.
Remember Bo Nix in Auburn?
Absolutely. So, when I bring up Bryce Young and Cam Rising, to say those were two guys with a lot of experience with that team and those weapons and everything around them. This is a guy this is his first game with these new teammates, with this play caller, what have you. And you throw in that environment. So I just think, if I were a Miami fan right now, I'd be like, come on, like, is it really going to be that big a deal? Yes, it is going to be that big a deal.
Say what you will about Billy Napier, and I know what some people think about Billy Napier. I know some of you have him squarely on the hot seat, and I believe that he is. I mean, 11-14 in 2 years is not good enough. But they normally play pretty well in Gainesville. He's done a good job at home for the most part in 2 years. So we'll see if that continues, and it needs to. They have 4 huge home games prior to the cocktail party with Miami, Texas A&M, UCF, and Kentucky. And to me, they need at minimum to go 3-1 in those games if you want a realistic shot at a 7-5 season and a bowl game. Now to the game itself. Talking to people around the University of Florida, both that cover the team and that are inside the program, I've gotten the vibe over the last couple of weeks that they love the fact that people on the outside don't think they're any good. They absolutely are eating that up, and they're using that in every team meeting. Just, you want to talk about motivation. And look, we're going to find out pretty quick whether they're right or not, but they believe, Graham, that they're better than a lot of people on the outside think they are.
And every coach wishes that they could have that narrative in every offseason.
Mm-hmm.
Even a team that just won the national title. Any coach wishes that he could capture that and be able to show his players, everybody thinks you're no good, everybody thinks you suck, everyone's down on you.
They're picking you 12th in the SEC out of 16.
Coaches hate the opposite. Where coaches have a real challenge is when players are told how great they are, how amazing their team is, because then it's harder to motivate guys. But when guys have been told, I mean, you best believe Mertz, Montrell Johnson, Eugene Wilson,
Jason Marshall.
You best believe all those guys are like, all right.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean they're necessarily going to do anything, but you best believe that in their mind they think that. And Shane Matthews brought up a really good point during Gators Roundtable when we went down in Gainesville a couple weeks ago. He said, look, like on the outside we're going to predict the schedule and all that, whatever. Every single person in that locker room that's showing up to practice every day and doing summer workouts, and all, they think they're going to beat every team on their schedule. So, and they're obviously not, but you get the point. Is that they absolutely believe they're showing up and they're really proving themselves this first game.
Well, and a couple of things too. Number one, to your point, Florida's been told how terrible they're going to be the entire offseason, where Miami's been told how great they're going to be.
Correct.
Everybody has Miami in the 12-team playoff, so Miami's heard for 6 months that this is their year. Florida's heard they're going to be awful. There's motivation. Number two, look, you obviously, in a Florida situation, would much rather be playing Ball State, right, or Kent State. I mean, I get that. But I think if you're going to play a Power 4 team, that's going to take some used to getting, say, Power 4 instead of Power 5.
Yeah, it's been kind of weird.
If you're going to play a Power 4 team out of the gate, to me, it's a lot better to play a Miami than to play, Virginia Tech or Penn State or anybody equivalent to that, Oklahoma State, because of the motivation that these Gator guys know these Miami guys. They played high school football with them. Some even were teammates in high school ball. I mean, if you want laser sharp focus, you're playing against guys that you know. You're playing against a team that's been told how great they're going to be the entire offseason, where you've been told you're going to be awful. There are a lot of motivating factors. Now, none of that is going to mean anything if Florida doesn't go out there on Saturday afternoon and execute. You're not just going to roll out there and beat Miami. I'm not saying that. But I go back to Graham Mertz, too. Everybody's talking about Cam Ward in this game. And Cam Ward's debut for Miami, and how he was the best player in the portal, and Cam Ward this and Cam Ward that. Go back and look at Graham Mertz's stats last year. If you just black out the name, touchdowns, interceptions, completion percentage, yardage, Graham Mertz was good last year. yet he is the forgotten quarterback coming into this game tomorrow.
He just keeps coming to my mind, so not to continue to bring up Shane Matthews, but he said something else about Graham Mertz I thought was super interesting. He said if Steve Spurrier was coaching on the sideline with a visor on, coaching this guy, everybody in the country would be talking about him.
Mm-hmm.
And he'd be like Heisman candidate and all. Like, he said this guy would have been a picture-perfect Steve Spurrier quarterback, which I thought was super interesting because if you're a picture-perfect Steve Spurrier quarterback, what does that mean? That means you're incredibly smart. That means you can learn and know what you're doing in a very sophisticated, complex offense where there's all types of different wrinkles and what have you. And then it means that you're very, very good at putting your playmakers in a position to succeed. And I wanted to kind of transition the conversation a little bit to that hat because that's one thing I have a little bit of concern with this Gator offense. I think they're going to be a pretty good offense methodically moving down the field. I think the running game is going to be relatively good, assuming Montrell's health. But even still, I kind of like the backs behind him as well to be able to step in. I think Treyon Webb can play well. I think Jaden Ball has looked really good in spring and camp. Katie Daniels, I think, could play well. What concerns me is offensively, do they have enough explosive down-the-field playmakers not named Eugene Wilson?
Well, you hope the two transfers, right?
DK and Badger.
DK from Wisconsin, Badger from Arizona State. You hope a guy like Aiden Mizell, Boardingham at tight end, whether he's explosive or not, he's going to be a weapon at tight end. So yeah, that's certainly a question. There is no doubt about that. But, I go back and, looking at Graham Mertz's numbers last year, you're as big a Gator fan as there is. You can obviously be an objective broadcast journalist as you're wearing your Gator hat here during the Gator Bytes podcast.
Exactly.
Off the top of your head, you remember Graham Mertz's numbers last year?
I can't remember specifically, but I know he was really high completion percentage guy.
So Mertz completed 73% of his passes for 2,900 yards, 20 touchdowns, and 3 picks.
It's pretty good.
It's pretty good, right?
Yeah.
And yet we're not talking about him at all. At least the national folks aren't going into this game. It's all about Cam Ward.
And I'd say one of those 3 picks, by the way, in the Utah game, remember that pick went off of Pearsall's hands.
Yeah.
I would put that more in Pearsall than I would have Mertz.
I mean, how many Gator quarterbacks have thrown for 20 touchdowns and only 3 picks in a season in a long time? So,
well, but that's the thing. He's extremely efficient, and we know that. And I think Mertz getting you down the field, completing passes, getting this guy here,
and he'll run the ball a little bit, which is something he needs to be more careful of. That's how he got hurt last year.
Right. He does have decent mobility. 50-yard passes, 60-yard passes, 70-yard passes. Like, that's, I think, to be a better football team than they were last year, that's a step that it doesn't mean they're going to be the 08 Gators. But they just need to be a little bit more explosive. A couple more chunk plays here and there I think need to happen.
I'm picking Florida. Here's where it could blow up very quick, though. Talking to a lot of Miami people heading into this game. The liability on the Miami defense appears to be the secondary.
Yeah.
They're replacing 2 safeties. They got young corners. You can exploit the secondary. Their front 7's really good. And they think their front 4 is going to be one of the better Miami front 4s they've had in a long, long time. Yeah. That Gator offensive line better put on their big boy pants tomorrow. Because if that Miami D-line gets pressure on Mertz, it may be game over. If Mertz has time to get DK, Badger, Mizell, obviously, Wilson, Boardingham, Montrell Johnson, if they have time, then I think they can do some good work. Don't forget the local
kid, man, Marcus Burke.
Marcus Burke as well out of Trinity Christian. Treyon Webb out of Trinity Christian. But the Gator O-line at times was not good last year. Now, this is how bad it was last year. I've literally been told that they at least have 2 college offensive tackles this year. I wasn't really told that last year, but they do have 2 college-worthy offensive tackles. So
well, one of their tackles last year is now their starting guard. So
right, who's Barber, right?
Well, Barber's starting at tackle.
Barber's at tackle. Who the starting guard? Damian George. Oh my gosh, yes, and I've heard he's better. But that was not good, the transfer from Alabama last year.
I thought Damian George last year at offensive tackle was the worst offensive tackle I've ever seen put on the Gator uniform.
It was bad. Now, they brought in the kid from San Diego State. They brought in another couple of transfers as well, but their offensive line on paper appears to be better. And it better be, because that Miami front four is legit.
And then flip it. The other side of the ball, Miami's offensive line is one of the better offensive lines in
Supposed
college
to be very
football.
good, yep.
So my concern, the trenches are my concern on either side of the ball in this game. I think if Florida wins, the world where Florida wins is it's a tight game most of the way. The swamp gives them a little magic, and they can take advantage of that secondary. Trey Wilson gets behind him, a couple big plays. Arliss Boardingham, I think, could have a nice day doing some underneath stuff, what have you. DK Badger get involved. They're running the ball pretty well. And they have long, methodical drives that get them, maybe 24, 28 points, something like that, and they win by 3-7 points, something like that. The way Miami wins is they just physically beat up Florida in the trenches, which is there's a very real world where that happens.
There is.
And I think if that happens, I think if Florida wins, it's going to be close, like I said. I think if Miami wins, they win by 10-14.
Something on that in one moment. Today's Gator Bytes podcast is brought to you by Southeast Orthopedic Specialist. For the highest quality care, you can rely on Southeast Orthopedic Specialist for any orthopedic injury or concern. You can log on to their website by going to se-ortho.com, and you can listen for Southeast Orthopedic Specialist, the good doctor, Kevin Murphy, on Thursday mornings in the 7 o'clock hour with Jeff and Dan right here on 1010XL for his weekly analysis of injuries in sports. Miami offensive line, very good. Where Florida could potentially survive and where Florida's better off than they were a year ago is, if nothing else, they have more bodies. You weren't rotating a lot of D linemen last year. They just didn't have numbers there. You can legit rotate 7, 8, 9 guys on that D line. So if nothing else, the Gator D line won't be worn down because they can rotate a lot more guys in that they feel comfortable out there playing.
And I think they're top-end guys that maybe played last year but should be taking a step forward. They sucked to lose Jamari Lyons, but the other guys, I think,
like a TJ
Searcy, Sapp.
Yeah.
I think Sapp could be one of the better defensive linemen in the SEC this year.
I can't wait to see the freshman LJ McCray.
And then I was about to say LJ McCray.
Yeah.
So if Sapp takes even another step, Sapp was a really good player last year. If he takes even another step forward and is really causing problems for the other team's offensive line, and you factor in if LJ McCray could look like Harold Perkins did for LSU year one. If he looks like that, and you pair Sapp and some of these other guys, all of a sudden you got a pretty damn good defensive line that you can feel really, really good about, particularly on obvious passing situations.
3:30, August 31st, in the Swamp. It's 2 Florida teams. Is there an advantage either way? I mean, it is going to be steamy down there in Gainesville tomorrow. Will that affect either team, in your opinion?
With the Heat? No. The Heat, both teams have been going through all fall camp in the blistering heat. Florida's been in Gainesville. Miami's been down in South Florida. The disadvantage is for the fans.
Yeah.
The disadvantage is for all of us. Hydrate, drink your Gatorade, drink your water. Alternate some waters with the brown water you might be drinking and the beers you might be sipping on, and wear your dry fit shirts.
Yeah, it's going to be bad. It's going to be hot. Just know that going in. Blue jerseys tomorrow. That surprise you at all? I mean, I know that's the home staple, but Miami's going in the all-white. I don't know. Normally, like in the NFL, when home teams are playing in September, you'll see the home teams in the all-white to try to give you any advantage against the Heat.
Yeah, it was a little weird. Miami wearing white with the fans wearing white was kind of interesting. I mean,
it was a big topic on social media.
It was.
Yeah.
Dan Hicken was upset about it yesterday. He went on our weekend in Jacksonville program we do and told all of us to relax about it. It's not actually that big a deal, but I mean, I like him wearing the blues at home, though,
it's tradition. There's no doubt about that. All right, so as far as the game goes, let's get to Billy Napier and Mario Cristobal. Gigantic game for both guys, goes without saying. From Billy Napier's standpoint, a win on Saturday against Miami. How big is that for him in the cause of public perception moving forward?
Let's put it this way. What do you think right now on average Gator fans would give him grade-wise as a coach? Like a C-, C?
Yeah, C-.
A win in this game, I think, bumps him to like a B. So, but about a whole letter grade worth of coach. For Mario Cristobal, if Miami views him as a B coach right now, probably something like that, you'd say, it bumps him down to maybe like a D. I think it's pretty bad if they lose.
Well, here's the crazy thing about it, and this is something I've talked about all week on Hacker After Dark, and I don't understand why it's not a bigger story, but maybe it's because Cristobal played there and Miami fans love him and he's doing well in recruiting. 25 games for both guys. Napier's 11-14. Gator fans are furious. You know what Cristobal is? Do you know?
No.
12-13.
In it with a far easier schedule.
He's one game better than Billy Napier. 25 games in.
And
he's won 12, Billy's won 11.
If Cristobal had Napier's schedule, what would the record be?
Right. So why is there this hot seat talk for Billy, whereas Miami seems ho-hum? I agree with you. Miami loses on Saturday, their fan base is going to be angry.
I don't know that Miami's I don't know that they're super ho-hum about Mario Cristobal.
You hear a lot more talk about Billy being on the hot seat than
But
Cristobal.
I think that's just because people are ho-hum about Miami every year. I don't know if that's as much Cristobal. But look, to be fair, I mean, they got arguably the best running back in the portal.
Damian Martinez. His first game for Miami tomorrow, by the way.
And pretty much inarguably the best quarterback in the portal. So, to be fair, I mean, that would make me optimistic. So, I think it's because the personnel acquisitions have been there between the portal and the recruiting. So, maybe at a little bit of a higher end than Billy Napier has done. Billy Napier got the shiny objects with DJ Lagway and LJ McCray this past year, and he has had decent recruiting classes, but I don't think to the level of Cristobal and what he's gotten. To get those two guys in the portal was pretty damn impressive.
If Billy Napier in Florida wins on Saturday, is it Billy's biggest win?
Yeah.
His coach?
Yeah, oh yeah.
Bigger than Utah 2 years ago?
Yeah. Because that was first game, had a long road ahead in the season.
What are the list of his big wins? Utah, Tennessee last year.
Tennessee at home. It's
was
those
a big
two.
win. Yeah. Yeah, I would think Miami would be the biggest win. You're right.
Yeah. Tennessee, I think. Well, Tennessee last year was a big win.
The way they did it too, they dominated them.
Yeah.
They might pay for that in a couple weeks in Knoxville.
I just think this one, with it being an in-state rival that you don't play every year. Their coach is also in year 3. There's a lot of comparisons to draw between the two programs right now. You're in recruiting battles with this school with basically every 4 and 5 star that you want. This is the bigger game to me. Utah was a huge win that first year. That game was more so just Anthony Richardson going crazy. And then also, like, Utah's not a rival, like a year in, year out rival that you're competing for 4 and 5 star recruits with all the time. So there weren't as many long-term ramifications for that game. It was just a great win to have.
The interesting thing moving into tomorrow in the game, I don't know any Miami fan that thinks they're going to lose. All the Miami people I've talked to think they're going to win because I think Napier's a joke. Yet the exact same thing can be said for Florida. I know a lot of Gator fans that are picking Florida to win because they have no faith in Cristobal as the head coach of Miami. So some fan base is going to be very disappointed tomorrow night at about 7 o'clock.
Yeah, I mean, dude, it's week 1. It's week 1 with two rivals playing each other. Of course, everyone thinks they're going to win.
But didn't you kind of know last year that Florida going to Salt Lake City, they weren't going to beat Utah in week 1?
I think I picked them because I got caught up in the emotion. But in the back of my head, I knew.
Right. But I think this year's different. You could argue Miami, and they're a top 20 program. Miami's the favorite. Last time Florida's been an underdog for their home opener, I don't even know when.
Yeah.
Decades, probably. Decades and decades. Yeah, as we got, and I guess I'm guilty of it too because I was picking Miami for a while. I've talked to too many people down there, but Florida's just got this quiet confidence, and they love the fact that people think they're bad because they think they're a lot better than the outside world does.
I heard that same narrative last year, though.
Yeah, but last year they were starting on the road in Salt Lake City.
I don't disagree. I'm just saying I heard that narrative last year. I heard, we're better than people think we are.
Well, the offense was.
They were.
The offense didn't lose Kentucky.
No, but the team
offense
did.
didn't. Yeah, but the defense was awful.
They did, but that's part of the team. I mean,
right.
You got to play defense to win.
That gets to my next point. All right, Austin Armstrong, you brought in Roberts from Auburn. I know I see your face, dude. I'm 40 years old. 40 years old. I remember when I was the young guy at the station. Now I'm 40. Yikes.
And now you're old as hell, dude.
I am old. Old man. Old grizzly man. And I was one of those spoiled guys before I became, of course, an objective broadcast journalist that I am now, that I really don't remember anything pre-Spurrier. My first Gator memory was probably 1990, right, when Spurrier's first year. So what is that, 35 years it'll be of Florida Gator football that I've remembered? I'm not sure if I've seen a worse defense than last year, particularly against Kentucky and LSU. It was putrid. They have got to be better, or this season's going to get away from them very quickly. We're going to find out Saturday at 3:30. If they say they're better, we're going to figure it out pretty quick.
I would say if you go all the way back to 2020, 2020, 21, 22, and 23 seasons. Probably not the 21 team, but the 20, 22, and 23 seasons, all three of those teams arguably had the three worst defenses in school history. And I think this past year might have been number one.
It was awful.
I mean, the Jaden Daniels game against LSU was the most comical thing I've ever seen. I mean, Florida's offense was going down the field and scoring most drives.
4th and 18 against Missouri was pretty comical, too.
That's the single worst play in Billy Napier's tenure so far, right?
I don't know. Anthony Richardson on a Hail Mary against Vanderbilt, throwing it 10 yards into the stands when the game was literally over, was pretty bad.
Yeah, that was tough.
Oh, Hail Mary. Let's just throw it into row G.
Yeah. But that they probably weren't going to win that even if he did throw. It would have taken a great catch or something.
Sure.
They had the Missouri game won, man.
Yeah.
The game was over. They just had to stop a 4th and 16. I think that's the worst play. And if any type of play like that happens this year in these first, 7 games before Georgia, or 6 or 7 games before Georgia?
6 games before. No, 7, 8, 9, 10. It's 7 games before Georgia.
If any type of play like that happens, or any foolishness like that happens, or the Arkansas stuff that was happening at the end of that game, or if stuff like that happens this year, then Billy may as well just pack his bags before they head up to Jacksonville because, I mean, he ain't surviving.
Yeah, you got the schedule's 2 parts. It's the first 7 and the last 5, and the last 5 begins with Georgia. All right, we'll talk more about this game as we wrap up. Quickly, really nice slate tomorrow in the SEC. Before we get there, Southeast Orthopedic Specialists bring you today's edition of Gator Bytes. They're Northeast Florida's leading orthopedic center, providing an unparalleled level of care across numerous locations in both Jacksonville and St. Augustine. That includes Riverside, Northside, the South Side, the beaches, Fleming Island, and St. John's. I got my pre-pandemic sheet of paper here, lasting another Gator football season. And we always thank Southeast Orthopedic Specialists for their continued support of the Gator Bytes podcast. Final thoughts on Florida and Miami in one moment. Temple, Oklahoma tonight. Oklahoma, welcome to the SEC as they kick it off tonight against Temple. I don't think I'm breaking any news here. Oklahoma's going to win the game, but they're the first team out of the gate. Them in Texas. Oklahoma kicks off their SEC career this evening.
Is it weird still for you?
Oklahoma, because we don't talk enough about them. We always talk about Texas. The fact that OU is in the SEC too, we just haven't talked a lot about that this offseason.
Yeah, and I think it's partly too that the Gators are playing Texas this year.
Yeah.
I do think this will be.
It's a nice opener because Temple's not terrible.
Yeah, well, everybody has their opinions on conference expansion and everything in the expanded playoff and then yada yada yada. The biggest winner is the fans, man. We're gonna get great football games week in, week out. I think that playing cupcake after cupcake the first couple of weeks before you get into conference play is a thing of the past, man.
It appears to be. Well, and you have more leeway now with a 12-team playoff. You can afford a loss or two.
So teams are more willing to do it. And with the expanded conferences and the two biggest conferences of consequence, the Big Ten and the SEC, have both dissolved divisions. So now everybody's playing each other.
Right. So if you win your conference, you're in the playoff.
Yeah.
So you can lose a lot out of conference games. Yeah. So that's why you're going to see more, but you couldn't see that in the past. A lot of these games are not really worth talking about, to be honest, but the ones that are worth talking about, Southern Miss is always one of those interesting teams. They go to Kentucky. Kentucky's got a brand-new quarterback. We'll see what happens.
Does Brett Favre have some eligibility left?
Well, that's true, but, I mean, that's a nice opener for Kentucky because you should win the game, but Southern Miss will give you a nice test. Virginia Tech, Vanderbilt. People that cover the ACC, They love Virginia Tech. You know how many starters Virginia Tech has from last year's team that are back?
They return like mostly everybody, right?
20.
Yeah.
They have 20 starters of their starting
and Kyron
22.
Drone's supposed to be one of the better quarterbacks in the country, too.
I mean, Vanderbilt, I think ACC might get some bragging rights there with Vatek and Vandy.
Yeah.
Clemson and Georgia. No one's picking Clemson. In fact, I don't know many people giving Clemson a shot. What's your thought there?
I agree.
You think Georgia boat races them?
Yeah. I have this much faith in Cade Klubnik. This much. 0.
How much faith do you have in Carson Beck?
Decent amount. Because I think he's a good quarterback, and I think he's on a very, very, very good team.
We do our show in Jacksonville, Florida. A lot of ifs need to happen here, but he's already won a state championship. He was already Mr. Football in high school. He's a front runner for the Heisman. He's a projected top 5 pick in the draft, and he's the quarterback of the overall favorite to win the national championship. If all 3 of those things come to fruition, Heisman, top 5, national champion, on the field, right? Not in the court of public opinion, because it's always going to be Tebow. But on the field, Jacksonville related, do you have to start comparing Carson Beck to Tim Tebow if he does all of that this year?
No.
Heisman winner, national champion, top 5. Tebow wasn't a top 5 pick. I'm not saying in the court. I'm not saying no. I'm not public opinion wise. It's always going to be Tebow. Carson Beck would have more accolades if he was a top 5 pick and did those other 2 things.
Accolades, sure, but Carson Beck is steering the ship of a very, very, and you know.
What do you think Tim was doing?
I understand that, but
with
Tim
Spikes and the Pouncey twins and Harvin and Hayden and all those guys.
But Tim was also running over linebackers, making plays. He's the best short yardage quarterback in the history of college football.
I think he's maybe the best quarterback in college football. He's in the conversation. But
is anyone going to say that about Carson Beck, regardless of these accolades? No. There's a reason for that. Like, I get what you're saying about accolades, but the eye test and what you're watching matters, too.
Yeah. It would be an interesting story for our audience here in Jacksonville.
Carson Beck's a great player, but Tim Tebow, come on.
And a lot of that stuff has to happen. The conversation doesn't even happen unless Carson wins the Heisman, unless he's a top 5 pick, and unless he wins the national championship.
Are they how are they going to finish the season, do you think? Do you think they're going to win it all?
Georgia?
Yeah.
I mean, they're going to be in the playoffs. So they have every opportunity.
But are they going to be in the championship, win the championship? What do you think?
I mean, if I had to pin it down right now, I'd say at minimum they're in the semis. They're one of the final 4.
I bet they lose in the Natty to Ohio State.
I
think Ohio State's the best team in the country.
I'm not sure if Ohio State wins their conference. People love Oregon. Oregon.
Ohio State's better than Oregon.
All right, we'll see. I think Ohio State goes to Oregon.
And by the way, I think Dylan Gabriel is winning the Heisman.
The new Oregon quarterback.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because I think offensively they're going to be insane and put up just crazy. He's better than Bo Nix.
So you like Georgia over Clemson?
Yeah, I like Georgia to smack them around.
Notre Dame, Texas A&M. Hey, Mike Elko, welcome to being the head coach in the SEC. You get the Fighting Irish.
Gets him at home, though.
Opening night, yep.
Gets him at home, so...
Gator fans, by the way, you have this game to thank for your game not being at night. ABC chose Notre Dame and A&M over you.
Yeah, it's crazy. I'll take the Aggies in that game.
Over Notre Dame, really?
Mm-hmm.
Mike Elko's debut. You're going to take him I don't know about that. I think I'm going to go Notre Dame in that one. That's a good game, though. That's a good game.
Finally, I want to stay consistent. We keep talking about the swamp magic and how the swamp's going to help them a lot. That's a very, very, very tough place to play. Riley Leonard coming off injury. He's also new teammates. He's also in a new place in front of a hostile crowd against his old coach.
Well, I'm willing to bet that's never happened in the history of college football. Riley Leonard was the quarterback at Duke last year. Mike Elko was the head coach of Duke. Now, the first game of the next season, Riley Leonard is the quarterback of Notre Dame playing against his former head coach, who's now at A&M. That is a crazy scenario if you think about it.
It is. And I think that's advantage A&M. I think you have a coach that knows the tendencies of his quarterback and has a crowd against him.
You also have a quarterback that knows his coach, for whatever that's worth. It works both ways, right?
I don't know if it's worth as much.
All right, we'll see. That'll be a lot of fun tomorrow night. That'll be a lot of fun if Florida wins. If Florida doesn't win, we'll all kind of be sulking in misery.
Florida wins, and you get to get horizontal on your couch, enjoy some chicken wings, a couple of adult beverages, and just watch ball the rest of the night in peace.
Quickly, Sunday night, life after Caleb Williams begins for Southern Cal. Life after Jaden Daniels begins for LSU. Again, an interesting dynamic. The top 2 picks in the draft, their alma maters play each other in Las Vegas, Southern Cal and LSU.
Give me Louisiana State University.
Even though they're replacing Jaden Daniels and Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas and Mason Smith, people that cover the league really like LSU this year.
Their quarterback's name. He's the old OC of the Gators. Son.
Nussmeier.
I really liked him in the flashes that he played. 2 years ago, he played a little bit. Daniels was injured. I think he got hurt for like a spell in a couple games, and I think he's gonna be really good. I think he's gonna be one of those quarterbacks that LSU, obviously, in Baton Rouge, they're talking about him, but nationally, I don't think a ton of people are talking about him yet. I think he's gonna be one of those guys that week 4, week 5, week 6, we're gonna be saying his name.
Quickly, is Florida State, do they have a get-right game on Monday against Boston College?
Yeah, they're going to beat them. I think Boston College might keep it competitive, though.
Boston College should have beat them last year.
Man, Castellanos can move around. I don't think FSU is going to murder them. I think fourth quarter, it's still a game. But I think FSU probably pulls away, wins by like 10 by the end of it.
I would imagine Florida State is very anxious for that game to kick off, to get last week out of their heads. All right, finally, I think we've both talked about it already enough, but let's wrap it up with this. Miami and Florida, 3:30 kick. Of course, you'll hear the game on 1010XL, 92.5 FM here in the city of Jacksonville. You being a Gator alum, you're going, right?
Yes, sir.
No, you'll be there in the
Dylan
swamp.
Denmark and myself will be there together.
Nice. You like the Gators?
I do. I like the Gators. What did I say on our podcast? I forgot the exact. I think I said 28-24.
Is that the award-winning Denmark and Marsh podcast?
It is indeed, yep.
Nice.
I think I said 28-24 Gators, I want to say. It was 20-24 or 31-28 Gators.
Well, here I've said this. I let it off 30 minutes ago or so, and I'll say it again in closing. I think Miami's got more talent on paper. I think Miami's going to have more wins at the end of the year. I think Miami's probably the better team, if you had to ask me. This pick, I don't even call it a homer pick. This pick is a swamp-related pick. The game's in Gainesville. It's going to be loud. It's going to be intimidating. It is going to be wild in there tomorrow. If you fans make it so, which I assume you will. And for basically that reason and that reason alone, I'm going to take Florida. If this game was in South Florida, I would take Miami. If this was at a neutral site like Tampa, I would take Miami. Because it's being played in Gainesville, Florida, I'm going to take the Florida Gators to win the game.
So we both picked the Gators.
Both picked the Gators to win.
We'll have to revisit this in a week and see if we were big dumbasses or if we were correct.
We'll see. I like the Gators big next week, by the way. Now, we'll be back to review Miami and preview that big Samford matchup, but I think Florida's going to have an easier time of it next week. Marsh, I enjoyed it. The season's off and running, man.
Yes, sir. College football is back, baby.
That is Graham Marsh. I'm the hacker, Ryan Green. Thank you to Southeast Orthopedic Specialist for bringing you Gator Bytes right here on 1010XL.com and the Florida Gator 1010XL Facebook page.